Dr. Evelyn Carter had always dreamed of exploring the stars. She was a scientist, not a soldier, and never imagined she would end up fighting for survival on a strange deserted planet. But fate had other plans. The mission was supposed to be routine, a deep space expedition to study a newly discovered system. The ship, Nova Horizon, carried a mix of humans and alien researchers, including the tall and imposing Commander Vale from the Xiferan species. He was part of the Galactic Alliance, an advanced race known for their intelligence and strength. Everything changed when an unexpected asteroid storm struck. The impact was devastating. The ship lost control, alarms blared, and in a matter of minutes, they were plummeting toward an unknown planet. Evelyn barely had time to secure herself before the ship crashed. The force of the impact knocked her unconscious. When she woke up, everything was silent, too silent. She pushed aside the debris pinning her down and coughed as she inhaled the thick, dusty air. The ship was broken beyond repair, scattered across the barren landscape. Fires burned in the wreckage, and the sky above was dark with smoke. "Is anyone there?" Evelyn called out, her voice hoarse. A low groan came from a few meters away. She turned and saw a figure moving among the wreckage. It was Vale. His deep blue skin was scratched, his armor cracked, but he was alive. He stood up slowly, his glowing golden eyes scanning their surroundings. "You survived," he said, his voice calm despite the situation. "So did you," Evelyn replied, relieved that she wasn't alone. They were the only ones left. The rest of the crew, human and Xiferan alike, were gone, either lost in the crash or scattered across the vast planet, their fates unknown. The landscape around them was harsh and unwelcoming. Jagged rock formations stretched into the distance, and the air was dry and thin. A large moon loomed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the land. There was no sign of civilization, no radio signal, no beacon to call for help. They were stranded. Evelyn took a deep breath, pushing away her fear. "We need to find shelter before nightfall," she said. Vale nodded. "Agreed. This planet is unfamiliar. We don't know what kind of dangers it holds." They searched the wreckage for anything useful. Most supplies were destroyed, but they managed to salvage a few essentials: water rations, emergency medical kits, and a small energy blade that Vale carried. As they walked away from the crash site, Evelyn felt the weight of their situation settle on her. They had no way to contact their people, no clear idea where they were, and no certainty of survival. But she refused to give up. The sun was setting by the time they found a cave carved into the side of a cliff. It wasn't much, but it would protect them from the elements. As they entered, the walls shimmered faintly, reflecting their dim emergency lights. Vale ran his hand over the surface. "This rock is not natural. It's been shaped, possibly by intelligent life." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "You think this planet had inhabitants?" "Maybe," Vale said, "or still does." A sudden gust of wind howled outside, and the temperature dropped sharply. Evelyn shivered. She had a feeling their troubles were only beginning. As the night fell, the darkness outside seemed alive, shifting and whispering like something unseen was watching them. They were not alone. The cold night wrapped around the cave like a silent predator. The wind outside howled, carrying strange sounds that made Evelyn uneasy. She sat near the small emergency light they had salvaged, trying to stay warm. Vale stood near the entrance, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. His posture was tense, ready for any danger. "You think something is out there?" Evelyn asked, hugging her arms for warmth. Vale didn't look at her. "I don't think. I know. This planet is not empty." His words sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. She wanted to believe it was just the wind, just her imagination. But deep down, she knew Vale was right. Still, there was nothing they could do now. They were exhausted, and without rest, they wouldn't survive long. "Get some sleep," Vale said. "I will keep watch." Evelyn wanted to argue, but she knew it was pointless. She lay down on the rocky ground. using a piece of fabric from the wreckage as a pillow. The hard surface made her back ache, but exhaustion soon pulled her into a restless sleep. She woke to the sound of movement. Her eyes shot open, heart pounding. The cave was dimly lit by the emergency light, and Vale was still near the entrance. But he wasn't alone. Something lurked in the darkness beyond him. A pair of glowing green eyes blinked at them from the cave's entrance. The creature was tall, its body covered in thick, chitinous armor that shimmered under the faint light. It had 4 legs and 2 long, clawed arms, and its head was elongated like a predator's. Evelyn froze. Vale moved slowly, gripping his energy blade. "Do not make sudden movements," he whispered. The creature tilted its head, watching them. It didn't attack, but it also didn't retreat. It was studying them, deciding whether they were a threat or prey. Evelyn's pulse raced. If this thing attacked, they had no real weapons. The energy blade could do some damage, but it was small. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the creature turned and vanished into the night. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. That thing was hunting us. Vale nodded, and it will return. By morning, the air was dry and heavy. The sun had risen, casting an eerie red glow over the rocky landscape. "We need food and water," Evelyn said. "We won't last long without them." Vale agreed. They had to move fast. They left the cave cautiously, scanning their surroundings. The planet was rough, with jagged cliffs and dried riverbeds. There was no sign of plant life, no visible water sources. Hours passed as they searched. Evelyn's throat was dry, her legs aching. Every step felt heavier. Then Vale suddenly stopped. There, he pointed ahead. Evelyn followed his gaze and saw something she hadn't expected, a massive structure. It was half buried under rock and sand, but its smooth metallic surface was unlike anything natural. "A ship," Evelyn whispered, hope rising in her chest. Vale shook his head. "No, this is much older." They approached carefully, stepping over broken stones. The structure had strange markings carved into its surface, symbols neither of them recognized. Evelyn reached out, brushing her fingers over the cold metal. This was built by someone. But who? Before Val could answer, the ground beneath them shifted. A low, humming noise filled the air. The markings on the structure glowed faintly. Evelyn stepped back. "I think we activated something." The hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground. Dust and sand trembled around them. And then, the entrance slid open. A deep, dark corridor stretched beyond. Vale tightened his grip on his blade. "We are not alone on this planet. We need to be careful." Evelyn took a deep breath, pushing down her fear. They had no choice. If there was a chance for survival inside, they had to take it. Together, they stepped forward, into the unknown. Evelyn's heart pounded as she stepped into the dark corridor, her breath shallow. The air inside the ancient structure was stale but breathable. Dim blue lights flickered along the walls, casting eerie shadows. The metallic surface beneath her boots felt cold, untouched for whom knew how long. Vale moved ahead of her, his tall frame tense, his energy blade in hand. His golden eyes scanned the surroundings with sharp focus. "This place is old," Evelyn whispered. "Maybe thousands of years." Vale nodded, "but the technology is still active." They advanced cautiously, the silence pressing in on them. The corridor stretched forward before opening into a vast chamber. Inside, strange consoles lined the walls, glowing faintly with alien symbols. In the center, a massive cylindrical pod stood, covered in dust and cracked glass. Something was inside. Evelyn swallowed hard. "What is that?" Vale stepped closer, brushing away the dust. His expression darkened. "A containment pod." Evelyn peered inside. A humanoid figure lay within, covered in strange armor. The body was motionless, frozen in time. She felt a chill run down her spine. "Are they alive?" she asked. Vale studied the pod's controls. "Hard to say. This technology is unfamiliar, but it's definitely keeping something preserved. Evelyn reached out and pressed a button on the console. The screen flickered, displaying alien text that neither of them understood. Suddenly, a deep mechanical hum echoed through the chamber. The pod shuddered, the cracks in the glass widening. The control panel flashed red. Evelyn took a step back. That's not good. Before Val could react, the glass shattered. A gust of freezing air burst out as the humanoid inside jerked upright, gasping. Its eyes snapped open, glowing a piercing silver. Vale raised his blade, stepping protectively in front of Evelyn. The figure inside the pod staggered forward, collapsing onto the floor with a heavy thud. Its breathing was labored, as if waking from a deep sleep. Evelyn hesitated, then knelt beside it. Now that the dust had cleared, she could see its features, part human, part alien, with dark gray skin and intricate markings along its arms. "I think it's waking up," she whispered. Vale didn't lower his weapon. "Be ready. We don't know if it's hostile." The figure slowly lifted its head, its silver eyes locking onto Evelyn. Then, in a hoarse, broken voice, it spoke. "Who are you?" Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. It could speak. But before she could answer, the walls of the chamber trembled. A deep, guttural roar echoed from the corridor behind them. Vale turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "We are not alone." Evelyn's stomach twisted with fear. Something else had just woken up, and it was coming for them. The walls shook again. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling as a deep, guttural roar echoed through the chamber. Evelyn's pulse raced. Whatever was out there, it was big. Vale immediately stepped in front of her, his energy blade humming to life. His golden eyes were sharp, scanning the dark corridor they had come from. The strange humanoid, still weak from its long sleep, struggled to stand. Evelyn swallowed hard and turned to him. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The humanoid's silver eyes flickered with confusion. I was a guardian," he murmured, "but I do not remember much." Another roar, this time closer. Vale tensed. "We don't have time for this. If we don't move now, we'll die here." Evelyn grabbed the humanoid's arm, helping him stand. His armor was cracked, his body trembling, but he nodded. "There is a way out," he rasped. "Follow me." Without hesitation, they ran. The corridors twisted like a maze, the walls pulsing with ancient energy. The lights flickered as the tremors grew stronger. Evelyn could hear it now, the sound of heavy footsteps, like metal scraping against stone. Something massive was chasing them. The guardian led them down a narrow hallway. "The exit is near," he said, "but we must hurry." Evelyn didn't argue. She forced her legs to move faster. Then, a deafening crash. The wall behind them exploded, sending shards of metal flying. Evelyn hit the ground hard, her ears ringing. Val grabbed her and pulled her up, his expression grim. Through the dust, she saw it. A massive four-legged beast emerged from the wreckage. Its skin was like black stone, its eyes glowing red, and its jaws lined with jagged metallic teeth. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. A machine and a creature combined. The guardian's face twisted in recognition. "The Sentinel," he whispered, his voice filled with dread. Vale didn't hesitate. He lunged, slashing at the beast with his energy blade. The weapon cut deep, sparks flying as it carved through the creature's metallic hide. But the Sentinel barely flinched. It swung one of its massive claws, knocking Vale back with terrifying force. He crashed against the wall with a grunt of pain. Evelyn's heart pounded. They couldn't fight this thing head-on. She grabbed a broken piece of metal from the ground and turned to the Guardian. "How do we stop it?" she asked desperately. The Guardian's silver eyes flickered. He looked at the glowing walls, then back at the beast. "The control core, it's in the heart of this structure." Evelyn gritted her teeth. "Then we shut it down." The Sentinel let out a bone-rattling roar, its red eyes locking onto them. It charged. Vale, injured but determined, pushed himself up and shouted, "Run!" Evelyn grabbed the Guardian's arm and sprinted toward the deeper corridors. They had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. This planet wasn't just a graveyard of the past. It was waking up, and it was angry. Evelyn's breath came in sharp gasps as she sprinted down the narrow corridor, her boots pounding against the metallic floor. Vale was right behind her, his injured arm pressed against his side, while the newly awakened Guardian struggled to keep pace. Behind them, the Sentinel let out another terrifying roar. The monstrous machine beast was closing in fast, its glowing red eyes burning through the dim corridor. "We need to keep moving," Vale grunted, pushing through the pain. The Guardian's silver eyes flickered with urgency. "The control core is ahead," he said, his voice strained. "But if we fail, this place will become our tomb." Evelyn clenched her fists. She wasn't planning to fail. They reached a massive door at the end of the corridor. The Guardian moved quickly, pressing his palm against the console beside it. Symbols flickered across the screen before the door slid open with a deep hiss. Inside was a circular chamber, filled with towering consoles and glowing panels. At the center of the room was a large, pulsating crystal, floating in a column of energy. The air was thick with power, humming with an almost ancient awareness. "This is the control core," the Guardian said. "It controls the Sentinels and the entire facility." Evelyn turned toward him, then shut it down. The Guardian hesitated. "It is not that simple. If I deactivate it, the entire structure may collapse." Another earthquake-like tremor shook the chamber. The Sentinel was almost here. Vale tightened his grip on his blade. "We don't have time for maybes. Either we stop it, or it kills us." The Guardian nodded, stepping toward the core. He stretched out his hands, and the symbols on the consoles shifted, responding to his presence. Evelyn turned back toward the entrance, gripping a metal pike she had picked up earlier. She wasn't a soldier like Vale, but she wasn't going to just stand there. A moment later, the Sentinel crashed into the chamber. The beast's red eyes burned brighter as it scanned the room. It let out a deep mechanical growl, its metallic claws tearing into the floor as it advanced. Vale moved first, charging at the creature. He dodged under a swiping claw and slashed at its leg, sparks flying from the impact. Evelyn saw an opening. She ran forward and swung her metal pipe at the Sentinel's glowing red eye. The impact sent a small burst of sparks flying, causing the beast to reel back momentarily. But it wasn't enough. With terrifying speed, the Sentinel lashed out, its tail slamming into Evelyn's side. She felt herself lift off the ground, pain exploding through her ribs as she crashed against the hard floor. "Evelyn," Vale shouted, eyes wide with concern. She coughed, struggling to breathe, but forced herself up. "I'm fine," she gasped. The Guardian's voice suddenly rang out. "I found the shutdown sequence." Evelyn turned to him. "Then do it." The Guardian placed his hands against the floating core, his silver eyes glowing. The entire chamber shook as the energy around the crystal flared, pulsating wildly. The Sentinel staggered, its movements becoming erratic. Sparks exploded from its joints. "It's working," Vale yelled. The monster let out one final ear-splitting roar before its red eyes dimmed. Its massive body convulsed, then collapsed, crashing to the ground with a deafening boom. For a moment, silence filled the chamber. Evelyn let out a shaky breath, her entire body trembling. Is it over?" The Guardian stepped away from the core, his face pale. "Yes," he said. "The Sentinel is disabled." But another deep rumbling shook the chamber. The glowing panels along the walls began flickering, one by one. The Guardian's expression darkened. "The facility is shutting down, and it's taking the entire structure with it." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "You mean?" Vale grabbed her arm. "We need to get out of here now." Without wasting another second, they ran. The ground cracked beneath them. The walls crumbled, sending debris falling from the ceiling. Evelyn barely dodged a collapsing support beam as they sprinted through the corridors. Ahead, a bright light appeared, an exit leading to the planet's surface. "We're almost there," she gasped. But just as they reached the doorway, the ground beneath them gave way. Evelyn felt herself falling, and everything went black. Evelyn's body felt weightless as she fell. The air rushed past her ears, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, impact. She landed hard on something rough and uneven, pain jolting through her body. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. For a moment, everything was silent. Then she groaned, slowly opening her eyes. She was lying on a slanted metal platform, surrounded by rubble. Dim light shone through the cracks above, where she had fallen from. "Vale," she called, her voice weak. A low groan came from nearby. She turned her head and saw Vale half buried under debris, struggling to push himself up. She crawled over, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "Are you okay?" He gritted his teeth, pushing a heavy metal beam off his leg. "I'll live," he said, "but we need to move." The ground shook again, another tremor rocking the unstable ruins around them. Evelyn looked up. The hole they had fallen through was far above, and the path back was completely blocked by debris. They had no way of climbing out. "The exit is gone," she whispered. Vale clenched his jaw. "Then we find another way." They pushed forward, moving through the collapsed structure. The walls were cracked, leaking steam and dust, and every step felt risky. As they turned a corner, they found the Guardian kneeling against a broken console. His silver eyes flickered weakly. "You're alive," Evelyn said in relief, helping him stand. "Barely," he said, "but this facility is dying. We do not have much time." Evelyn clenched her fists. "There has to be another way out." The Guardian's eyes flickered. "There is, but it is dangerous. More dangerous than being buried alive," Val said, crossing his arms. The Guardian hesitated, then pointed toward a tunnel at the far end of the chamber. "This leads to an ancient maintenance passage. If it still functions, it will take us to the surface." Evelyn didn't waste another second. "Then let's go." The tunnel was narrow and dark, the air thick with dust. Faint lights flickered along the walls, casting eerie shadows. As they moved deeper, Evelyn felt a growing sense of unease. Something about this place felt wrong. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shuddered and then collapsed. Evelyn screamed as she tumbled downward, landing hard on a metal surface. Vale and the Guardian crashed down beside her. She coughed, pushing herself up. "Is everyone okay?" Vale groaned, rubbing his shoulder. "I hate this planet." The Guardian, however, stiffened, his glowing eyes scanning the chamber. Evelyn followed his gaze, and her breath caught. They had fallen into an ancient chamber, larger than any they had seen before. The walls were lined with massive alien structures, their surfaces covered in glowing symbols. But at the center of the room stood something even more terrifying. A tall humanoid figure encased in a glass-like pod. It was at least 9 feet tall, its body covered in black, metallic armor. Strange tubes connected it to the walls, as if it had been asleep for centuries. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. "What is that?" she whispered. The Guardian's expression darkened. "A war construct, a being built for destruction." Vale tensed, hand on his blade. "Is it dead?" The Guardian hesitated, just as the pod began to crack. A deep rumbling filled the chamber. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, and suddenly, the pod shattered, sending shards flying in all directions. The war construct opened its glowing eyes. Evelyn's heart pounded as the towering figure stepped forward, its movements slow and mechanical. Its gaze locked onto them, scanning them with an unnatural intelligence. Then, with a voice that sent chills through the air, it spoke. Unauthorized life forms detected. The ground trembled beneath them. Val's grip tightened. "I have a bad feeling about this." The war construct raised an arm, and the symbols on the walls flared to life. Energy pulsed through the chamber, and Evelyn realized this thing wasn't just waking up. It was activating something. The Guardian's voice was sharp. "We must leave. Now." Evelyn didn't need to be told twice. She turned and ran, Vale and the Guardian right behind her. Behind them, the war construct took a step forward, and the entire chamber began collapsing. As they sprinted, Evelyn spotted a dim light up ahead. It was a crack in the ceiling, leading to the surface. Vale pointed. "There, that's our way out." But before they could reach it, a deep roar echoed behind them. Evelyn risked a glance back, just in time to see the war construct leap toward them. Her heart stopped. And then, everything went dark. A thunderous roar filled the air as the war construct lunged forward. Evelyn barely had time to react before Vale grabbed her wrist and pulled her aside, just as a massive metal fist slammed into the ground where she had stood. The impact sent a shockwave through the crumbling chamber, shaking the walls and making debris rain down from above. "Keep moving," the Guardian shouted. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. The only exit was the crack in the ceiling, but it was still too high. The war construct turned its glowing eyes toward them, scanning them with a cold, inhuman intelligence. It stepped forward, its heavy metal frame humming with power. "Unauthorized life forms must be eliminated," it declared in a deep mechanical voice. A pulse of energy surged through its arms, and Evelyn saw a bright glow forming in its hands. "Move E," Vale shouted. They dove to the side as a blast of blue energy shot from the war construct's palms, exploding against the far wall. The shockwave knocked Evelyn off balance, but she rolled and pushed herself back up. She turned to Vale. "We can't fight that thing." "We don't need to," he replied, his sharp gaze locking onto something above them. "We just need to get out." Evelyn followed his gaze and saw what he meant. A large, broken support beam hung precariously above the war construct, held in place by only a few weakened bolts. The Guardian saw it too. "If we bring it down, it may disable the construct." Vale grinned. "Let's test that theory." He reached into his belt and pulled out a small glowing device, one of the explosive charges he had salvaged earlier. Evelyn's eyes widened. "You had that the whole time." He smirked. "Always have a backup plan." The war construct turned toward them again, raising its arm to attack. Vale didn't wait. He threw the explosive directly at the weakened beam and fired his weapon at it midair. Boom! The explosion shook the entire chamber, sending shockwaves through the structure. The support beam groaned, then snapped. The massive chunk of metal came crashing down, right on top of the war construct. For a moment, everything was dust and debris. The floor trembled, and Evelyn held her breath, waiting. Then, silence. As the dust settled, she could barely make out the shape of the war construct, now pinned beneath the wreckage, its glowing eyes flickering weakly. Evelyn let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Did we do it? The Guardian's eyes scanned the construct. "It has been disabled, but not for long. We must go." Above them, the crack in the ceiling had widened from the explosion, letting in more light and fresh air. It was their only way out. Vale motioned to Evelyn. "You first." She hesitated. "What about you?" He gave her a reassuring nod. "I'll be right behind you." The Guardian stepped forward, lifting Evelyn effortlessly and boosting her toward the opening. She gripped the edge and pulled herself up, ignoring the pain in her muscles. As soon as she reached the surface, she turned back. Vale was already climbing up after her, with the Guardian right behind. Just as Vale reached out his hand, the ground below them rumbled again. The war construct, still pinned, let out a distorted growl. Its remaining functional arm twitched, then fired one last blast of energy directly at them. Evelyn's eyes widened. No. She lunged forward, grabbing Val's wrist and pulling him up just as the blast struck the wall below. The shockwave sent a violent tremor through the surface, making Evelyn lose her grip for a second. But Val managed to grab the ledge and push himself up. The Guardian followed, leaping up just in time as the entire structure below collapsed. The three of them rolled onto the sand, gasping for breath. For a moment, none of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind filled the air. Then, Evelyn started laughing, exhausted but relieved. We made it," she whispered. Val smirked, lying flat on his back. "Barely." The Guardian sat up, scanning the area. "The war construct is buried. It will take centuries to reactivate, if ever." Evelyn sat up, looking at the endless desert stretching before them. The sky was clear, the twin suns shining down brightly. She turned to Val. "Now what?" He took a deep breath, looking at the horizon. "Now, we survive." The Guardian's voice was calm. "Your child will be born soon. You must find shelter." Evelyn placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the life growing within her. She thought back to everything they had endured: the crash, the dangers, the war construct, and the bond she had formed with Val. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building a future. She smiled. "Then let's find a home." With the sun shining above and the endless horizon before them, they walked forward, toward whatever awaited them next. The end.